Happy Wednesday to everyone tuning in to today's episode of the Hirewell Update. I'm your host, Ryan Brown, Vice President of our Corporate Functions team, and this is my co-host.
I'm Emily Goor, Director on our Go-to-Market recruiting team.
The Hirewell Update covers the latest talent insights, monthly placement overviews, talent solutions, and the hottest jobs we're working on, all brought to you by us, your market experts here at Hirewell. Before we kick off the show, you can find all of our content at talentinsights.hirewell.com, or if you'd like to learn more about Hirewell or service offerings, check out our website, www.hirewell.com.
I know we've discussed recently the idea of FOMO.
Yep.
For those who did not catch that episode, it was a good one. You should watch it. But FOMO is fear of messing up, right? We know FOMO, fear of missing out, but FOMO, fear of messing up. And I feel like a lot of what we discussed is how FOMO affects the employer side, right? We talked about hiring managers being really fearful to pull the trigger on talent and long interview cycles because of that, and lots of stakeholders, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Today, we want to zoom in on the other side of that. So I would say overall, and of course there's exceptions, right? We're just talking overall trends and insights here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we've been noticing there are a lot more passive candidates right now that are not open to making a move. And that might sound stupid, but passive candidates not open to making a move.
Right. It is a little bit of a brain tease when you put it that way. But to clarify, because that might seem a little bit obvious, of course, passive candidates are move. What are you two talking about? That's crazy. We very frequently place passive candidates. And oftentimes that's why our clients come to us, because they need support finding candidates that are not actively seeking a new role. So a lot of our successful placements are passive talent that we have very specifically headhunted for a particular position with our client. So it's super commonplace to place passive candidates. And as you mentioned, it's become a little bit more of a challenge in the recent weeks to do so.
Yeah. And to clarify, yes, we get it. The definition of passive is like a lot of the times when we'll talk to candidates, it just means they're not firing off resumes every 5 seconds. Like they don't need to jump ship right away. But like you said, we have a ton of success in placing those, I'm not super actively looking type of candidates that we go outbound and find in our searches. We were comparing, we're both seeing it on your corporate function side, right? HR recruiting, office managers, finance and accounting. I'm seeing it a lot on the sales and marketing side of recruiting. I know I've been working with a few passive candidates recently. It's honestly been challenging. Mm-hmm. You know, I just use this as like a venting session. No,
I'm here for you.
It's been challenging. I think that things we run into, they're more challenging to get a hold of. Mm-hmm. They tend to offer up like a little bit more limited availability to interview, right? Versus someone who's super active is like, I can be totally flexible. Let me know what works for me. Yep. Exactly. So yeah, challenging to get a hold. I'm trying to think of other things. Challenging to get a hold of, limited availability for interviews. I'd say like overall, while they say, I'm interested in the opportunity, this is exciting, this could be a good move in my career. Mm-hmm. They also have made it, at least the ones I'm working with currently, they've made it very clear that their current role is their number one priority, right? Versus, again, I think that is a bit of a shift because we still like work with passive candidates who are willing to prioritize their search and the interview process with these companies that we work with.
Mm-hmm. I think everything you mentioned is just really common when it comes to recruiting passive candidates. And I think our goal for today too is just to give folks an overview on what to look for when you're recruiting passive talent, because there are some challenges, but there's some things that you should be mindful of too. So as you mentioned, it can be really challenging to get a hold of someone in a timely manner when they're very passive in their search. Their availability is more than likely going to be incredibly limited because, as you mentioned, they're keeping their current role as their top priority, not offering up a ton of flexibility and willingness to move things around and be accommodating. They're also likely not as transparent about compensation or even what type of range it might take for them to consider making a move. And those other perks that could be associated with total comp. They tend to also need longer notice periods. They really, really want to be mindful about giving their employer significant time to find a replacement, to do some offloading of responsibilities. And think one of the biggest things too is they could potentially be very open to considering a counteroffer, or at the very least, their employer may extend one.
That's a whole other topic. Maybe we'll hit that another time, the counteroffer. I mean, I feel though, like taking all of this into account, it's important that companies, hopefully you're listening because we've got some tips always, but I think companies really need to be taking a different approach to interview processes when you're interviewing and when you're excited about, honestly. Like, I know, again, I have a couple of clients right now who are particularly very excited about a couple of passive candidates. I think, okay, so some tips for companies interviewing passive candidates. I think there needs to be more of an emphasis on the employer selling the role and selling their company versus the candidate selling themselves. And I think some companies are not willing to do that, to be honest. They're like, well, if they're not excited about us, why should we? At the end of the day, if you're excited about a candidate, don't be afraid to sell yourself a little bit.
Exactly. That's such a good point. I'll get to set a few additional points here in a moment. But I think one of the things that is really challenging for employers to think about is how the market shifts from a candidate-driven market to an employer-driven market. And that will always happen. We have no idea how long it's going to last one cycle versus another, but that's something that
we say it all the time. Recruiting is cyclical. Like we've the amount of times we said that on this show. Yeah.
I know. We'd have to go back and count because it's been maybe 1 million at this point. But that's something that is really indicative of what's going on in the market currently. And so your approach has to change with the market. And this is like one of the biggest pieces that we're talking about right now.
It's a great point to bring in like that overall bigger picture of what the market looks like right now, and that how it cannot be static. Your approach to interviewing people cannot be static. Your interview process and the way that you interview talent, it has to change as the market changes. Like, we could probably stop the video right now, and like that's the message. Like your approach to interviewing top talent, especially top passive talent, has to change as the market changes. Like, period, end of story. But we want to give tips, right? So I'm curious, maybe we can get into just some ways that employers can sell themselves and sell their company in the role and combat the challenges of recruiting passive candidates.
Well, a few different things come to mind, and the list that I'll share today is not like all inclusive by any means, but it's things that I think are really simple for employers to think about and to exercise some creativity in different ways. So first and foremost, it's peeling back the layers when you're connecting with candidates. It's really asking questions to determine, are there any shortcomings in their current role or with their company? Peeling back the layers and covering those, really identifying what some of their pain points may be, even if they're not big ones. It's still something that's really important because that gives you a little bit of leverage, additional buying power. Then compare exactly. And
we're
then
really good at that.
Very, very good at that. Just comparing what your company can give them versus what they're not getting. Oh, Winnie, it wouldn't be a show without a Winnie Lou.
It's been so long. Oh, come on. We have not had Winnie Lou in so long. How exciting. Carry on, peeling back the layers.
Peeling back the layers. And I will say, you gave us a little plug there, but that's something that we're incredibly great at here at Hirewell, is just ensuring that we're really, really digging deeply into understanding the motivations. Even if initially it doesn't seem like there's any motivations, we will find them. I would also say, in terms of the employer side of things, it's really getting creative with your offer as well. It goes without saying that coming in with a higher base salary offer is one way to kind of gain traction with passive candidates.
Of course.
But there's also some other creative things that you can think about, such as extending a sign-on bonus, allowing for additional time off. Maybe you're adding an extra day or two in terms of working from home. It doesn't always have to equate into an actual dollar amount, but it's thinking holistically about what that big picture total package looks like for people. And also, again, pulling the levers in terms of what's maybe important to them. Perhaps they'd love to have another extra work from home day. They only have one currently. If you gave them 3, that might be enough to generate some movement there. We've talked about this so many times on the show about really making sure we're creating succinct interview processes. So this might sound like we're giving advice that is different from what we normally talk about,
No,
but
I don't think this is contradictory though. I think I know what you're going to say, and I don't think it's contradictory, but continue.
yeah. So in the cases of having passive talent, they might want to have the opportunity to chat with more than a few team members. They might want to have an additional 2 or 3 conversations with people on the team to really understand if this is the right fit for them and to ask those additional questions to gain additional insights from people. It can be incredibly helpful for folks that are very passive to have multiple conversations, to not feel like they've been rushed through an interview process after 2 conversations and now they're going to offer.
I think that's a great point. And again, it's different from what we've been saying. Like, I know a few episodes ago, we were talking about creating the right number of rounds of interview processes. And we see so many rounds these days and interview fatigue.
True.
So many interviewers. But as long as you're not mandating it and just giving the option
Exactly.
for these candidates, I think it's super helpful. I know recently a passive candidate asked to speak with somebody that would be reporting into them, as a director, higher level role. It'd be that they weren't part of the interview process, but like, hey, it would be great to see who would be reporting into me. I know also frequently like, someone who I'd be working with in the role that wasn't in the interview process. So there's ways to get creative there, as long as, again, you're not like mandating a trillion rounds of interviews.
Yeah, not a trillion.
Yeah, not a trillion. I think lastly, be patient.
Yes, absolutely.
I think you just mentioned something about like passive candidates especially do not want to feel like they are being hurried through an interview process.
No, not at all.
Again, like you have to think about, you cannot keep the same exact interview process and timeline. Sometimes when the market shifts, like we said, and sometimes going from candidate to candidate. Yes, you want the same sort of process and scorecard across candidates, but for passive candidates in particular, sometimes it might mean slowing it down a little bit, right? Being patient, lengthening your timeline. I think also just changing your perspective about how you view this passive candidate's lack of urgency, right? Or lack of availability. Try to view that in a different way versus, I've had some situations right now with passive candidates where clients are coming to me and kind of saying, we feel like they're not excited about us. They're not moving very quickly. They're not giving us a lot of availability. They're not super responsive. Like, is this a total red flag? I mean, I think, sure, maybe a yellow flag. I would not call it, though, a total red flag.
I wouldn't either.
I think you can kind of switch your perspective and potentially view it as the candidate having really strong loyalty, which is a really good character trait for somebody that you're considering hiring. So if they're saying, I'm really sorry, I have to be in the office, or like my team's working on this week and I really can't come in, I can't leave them hanging. We have a deadline. I know in sales, we see it a lot where I just dealt with this at the end of July, where they're like, I have to push till at least August 1st. We have to finish the month out strong. I think maybe try to view that as just them being hardworking and loyal to their current company, and maybe taking that as actually a good sign that can add value to your organization versus like a red flag that they're not excited about your organization.
Totally. I totally agree. And on this train of perspectiveness that we're on, I would also highly suggest to employers that are feeling that way to remember the amount of times you have probably needed to slow down an interview process where candidates have been on the receiving end of that and have felt like, gosh, I wonder if this company is excited about me. I wonder why it's taking 2 weeks to get feedback on my interview. And man, this hiring manager only has availability on days that I'm not available, and they're giving me one time this week. The shoe is on the other foot right now. It's uncomfortable, but oftentimes employers have put candidates in that position many, 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 many times, and candidates still remain optimistic and excited about opportunities. So just my last little piece of advice and little perspective for folks to walk away with today.
I love you turning it around a little bit.
You have to. I mean, how often do we hear that? How many times do we give that advice to our clients we're working with them where we say, hey, like the folks on our bench are getting a little bit antsy. We haven't heard from you in a week or so. Feedback should be coming a little bit more timely. What's going on? The shoe is on another foot right now, and it's uncomfortable for employers to be in that space for sure.
Couldn't have said it better. Yep, I completely agree. Well, fingers crossed you get a few of your passive candidates across the.
Fingers crossed you do. If anybody can do it, it's us, right?
I will. From your lips to God's ears, Ryan. I think we got to end on that. That's it. Just like manifesting. Bye.
Yeah, we're just manifesting. We're just giving out perspective left and right. Well, why don't you take us home? Because that's all I've got today.
That's all I've got too. That is a wrap for this week's episode of the Hirewell Update. Thank you all so much for joining us. As a reminder, you can find all of our content at talentinsights.hirewell.com. Or if you'd like to learn more about Hirewell and our service offerings, check out our website, www.hirewell.com. We'll be back next Wednesday around noon Central. See y'all then.
Have a great week.